Hasselblad has always stood for incomparable quality in medium format, be it analog or digital. In October 1948, Victor Hasselblad introduced the world to the Hasselblad 1600F, the world's first single-lens reflex camera for medium format. With its sleek, innovative design and modular build, the 1600F was a truly groundbreaking feat of engineering and one of the most influential models in the history of photography. The first Hasselblad camera, the 1600F, was built from 1948 to 1952. Like its successor, the Hasselblad 1000F, which was built from 1952 to 1957, it still had a focal plane shutter. The lenses were mainly from Kodak. Finally, in 1957, Hasselblad introduced the 500C camera. It was the first Hasselblad camera that did not have a built-in focal plane shutter. Instead, the shutter was designed as a leaf shutter and was integrated into each lens. The 500C offered a fastest shutter speed of 5/100th of a second and flash synchronization with all speeds. It replaced the 1000F. A great overview of all the analog Hasselblad cameras built can be found on Stefan Heyman's website. With the introduction of the 500C, it was no longer Kodak but predominantly Carl Zeiss from West Germany that manufactured the lenses for these and the upcoming Hasselblad cameras for analog film photography. And even today you can still use these lenses with original digital Hasselblad magazines, such as the CFV50C2 or CFV100C on your old analog treasures. The first models of the 500C were supplied from 1957 with a silver-colored 2.880mm lens. The lens housing was made of aluminum, hence the silver coloring. As the lenses contained a synchro-compur shutter, they are referred to today as C-lenses. The C itself was not printed anywhere, but the lettering synchro-compur was. All lenses have shutter speeds from 1 second to 1/500th of a second. The apertures can be selected in half steps. The C-lenses had movable depth of field indicators. More on this later. The aperture and shutter speed rings were coupled together and had to be uncoupled for adjustment. Thanks to the central shutter, all exposure times up to 1/500 can be used for flash synchronization. The C optics also have a setting for X for connecting and using an electronic flash, M for flash photography with flash bulbs, V for the built-in self-timer. All lenses also have a stop-down device. Filters in the size Hasselblad Bayonet 50 can be used. From 1974 or 1975, Carl Zeiss introduced an improved coating, the legendary T-star coating, which ensures a higher contrast image in backlight or sidelight. The T-star is always printed in red on the lenses. The optical construction is otherwise unchanged compared to the non-T-star lenses. Most, but not all, T-star lenses are black. A C-planar was delivered together with the 501C and the first 501CM sets. This is a slimmed-down CF planar which lacks the F setting for connection to the focal plane shutter cameras. The C-planar also lacks the button for coupling the aperture and shutter speed rings. The lens is labeled C-planar, but should not be confused with the previously mentioned C-optics. Here I would like to give you my reasons why I think it is worth buying Carl Zeiss lenses for the Hasselblad with the synchro-compur leaf shutter. Especially if you are new to the V-System, these C lenses are worth a closer look. Firstly, the price. C lenses are slightly cheaper than C lenses with the T-star coating, slightly cheaper than CF lenses, cheaper than the 3 available focal lengths of the CB lenses, and considerably cheaper than the CFI or CFE lenses. The CFE lenses are only of interest to owners of a 200 focal plane shutter Hasselblad camera, as they allow electronic contacts to communicate with the camera. CFI lenses are made of more plastic than the C and CF lenses. Also, the look and feel of C lenses appeals to me more. Here you only have glass and metal in your hand. Usually nothing has changed in the calculation from the C lenses to the CFI or CFE, except for the lenses with floating elements. The use of floating elements provides a constant image quality from the near to the far range. Without floating elements, the imaging performance is weaker at close range. As far as I know, only the following lenses have floating elements: Distagon CF4 40mm T-Star, Distagon CF4 50mm T-Star, Distagon CF E4 40mm IF CFE T-Star, Distagon CF E4 40mm T-Star, Distagon CFI 450mm T-Star. But I am very satisfied with my C lenses with focal lengths of 40 and 50mm. However, I rarely use them at close range. In the telephoto range, you can use the C lenses without hesitation. I would like to give you two examples with regard to the older C lenses. Ken Rockwell gets to the heart of the matter here by explaining the Sonnar 150mm. Although there are many cosmetic variations from 1957 through 2013, its optics never changed. T-Star multi-coating was added in the 1970s, but since this is a very simple 1930s four-element, three-group optical formula, it delivers great images even uncoated. All versions work great since all are at least single-coated. What did change over the years is cosmetics, shutters, and filter sizes. He also writes in his review about the C50mm, the Carl Zeiss C-Distagon 450mm is an optically and mechanically superior lens. It's one of the four most classic Hasselblad and Zeiss lenses of all time, along with the Planar C2.8 80mm, Sonnar C4 150mm, and Sonnar C5.6 250mm. While the 250 lens was a bit exotic, this 50, along with the 80 and 150 lenses, were in every top professional photographer's bag from the 1960s through the 1980s. Ansel Adams shot this lens extensively in the period. Good enough for Ansel, good enough for me. Secondly, cheaper filters. For the C lenses with focal lengths of 80, 100, 150, and 250mm, the UV Sonnar and the Superachromat 250mm, as well as the macro lenses 120 and 135mm, filters of size Hasselblad Bayonet 50 are used. I mainly use polarizing filters, UV or skylight filters, as well as Proxair for close-ups and Soft Air for portrait photography. These filters are significantly cheaper than their Bayonet 60 counterparts. The later CF lenses use the Hasselblad Bayonet 60. However, there is one advantage of the CF lenses that I would like to mention. Here, the CF50 CF60 lenses also use the Hasselblad Bayonet 60, whereas the C lenses of this focal length require the 63 series as an insert filter. Whether this point is an advantage for you depends on your preferred lens focal lengths. Thirdly, the built-in self-timer and the M-contact. Simply practical. Be it to get into the picture, which is rarely the case for me, but invaluable for shake-free shots from a tripod. This prevents the last vibrations. Of course, only in conjunction with the pre-release of the mirror, the auxiliary shutter, and the leaf shutter. With exposure times of up to 1 second, the cable release can be left at home, whether intentionally or, as often happens to me, simply forgotten. I rarely use M synchronization for flashbulbs, although I still own thousands of flashbulbs. Nevertheless, nice to have. Fourthly, their aesthetics. Personally, I find the C lenses aesthetically pleasing. I enjoy looking at them every time, and the feel is great. The first time I got my hands on one of these lenses, I immediately fell in love with it. And when I think today that these lenses could be up to 68 years old in 2025, performing their service without complaint with great optical performance, I think to myself, enjoy the small things, they make life great. There is one disadvantage I don't want to conceal, although over time this can affect all lenses with a leaf shutter and in general all photographic equipment. In the case of this C, but also CF and the other series, maintenance of the leaf shutter and the helicoid is recommended after decades. This involves adjusting the shutter speeds, removing any oil from the aperture blades, and cleaning and re-greasing the helicoid. As already mentioned in the first part of the video, the C lenses have 3 adjustable settings that are intended for different tasks. The X setting is intended for normal photography, without flash bulbs, and without self-timer. This position is also used to connect an X contact cable for flash photography with electronic flash units. All synchronous speeds of the lens can be used. This also applies to shutter speeds from 1/125 second to 1/500 second, an advantage of the leaf shutter. To adjust the small silver knob marked A, press the silver knob B slightly upwards, and at the same time push knob A to the desired position, in this case to M. Position M on the lens is intended for the use of flash bulbs. The lighting time of flash bulbs is significantly longer than that of electronic flashes. This is disadvantageous for shots where you need to freeze a fast movement. The flash duration of a classic flash bulb is around 1/30th of a second, whereas the flash duration of an electronic flash is often less than 1/1000th of a second, depending on the power level. Therefore, the leaf shutter must be synchronized differently when using flash bulbs. Here I show you the adjustment of the button from position M via X to V. V stands for Vorlaufzeit, as the lead time of the built-in self-timer. Here you can see the release of a Hasselblad lens, regardless of whether it is a C, CF, CB, CFI, or CFE. You can tell whether the shutter of the lens is cocked by the notch and the red dot that forms a line. You can also look through the lens, which is not possible when the lens is not cocked. For this video, I activated the self-timer with the C lens set to the V function. Activate the shutter by pressing the stylus lightly in the direction of the lens mount. The aperture closes to the set value, the leaf shutter closes completely, the auxiliary shutter in the camera opens, the advance time of the self-timer starts to run, and finally the leaf shutter opens for the set exposure time. The leaf shutter then closes again. If the lens is not cocked, the line between the notch and the red dot will not match. You will also not be able to see through the lens. It is extremely important that you only attach or remove cocked lenses to or from a camera that is also cocked, without exception. Otherwise, the camera and/or the lens will be damaged. Once the lens has been detached without the camera, as shown here, it must be cocked. Caution: the notch must be turned in the direction of the arrow. You can see how the leaf shutter opens. Make sure that you do not slip with the screwdriver and damage your lens. Alternatively, there is a special tool that offers a little more slip resistance and can also be used to clock the camera. But be careful here too. You act at your own risk. Sit back and watch the cocking of a leaf shutter. A very well thought-out function is the movable display of the depth of field range depending on the selected aperture. Two small displays increase or decrease in size and thus simply show the depth of field range. This is the area of the image that the human eye perceives as sharp. You can find out more about depth of field on my website apertureonepointfour.com. It is also full of other topics relating to analog, hybrid, and digital photography. The aperture or shutter speed is adjusted by pressing down the button shown here. This enables the mechanism for setting the aperture and shutter speed separately. The shutter speed is adjusted on the upper wheel while the button is pressed down. If you press the button down, you can adjust the aperture to your liking by moving the same button to the right or left. If this button is not pressed, the aperture value and shutter speed are shifted as a pair. This is useful if you have taken an exposure measurement and, for example, measured an exposure time of 125th of a second at f8. Transfer these values to the lens as described above. But then you think about it and come to the conclusion that a shallower depth of field is advantageous for this subject. So you simply turn the speed setting ring, and the aperture changes according to the selected shorter shutter speed, in this example to aperture 5.6 and 250th of a second, or aperture 4 and 500th of a second. At the end of the video, I would like to point out a special feature of the Carl Zeiss C-4 40mm. This lens does not yet have floating elements, which ensure that the lens performs evenly at all focusing distances. For this reason, there is a small button that must be pressed when the focus needs to be adjusted below 0.9 meters up to 0.5 meters. The distance adjustment ring of this lens has a detent at 0.9 meters for this purpose, which must be bypassed for shots in the range from 0.9 to 0.5 meters. This stop position is meant to remind the user that he must stop down at distances below 0.9 meters. If you focus again above 0.9 meters, the button snaps back and must be pressed again if you need to focus in the range just mentioned. Many thanks again for your time and interest. Stay healthy and see you in the next video from me.